T-34-100, the Soviet tank that could have shaken the world. Picture this. It's 1944, World War II is raging, and the Soviet Union is churning out tanks like nobody's business. The T-34, with its sloped armor and rugged reliability, is already a legend, tearing through Nazi forces like a hot knife through butter. But as the war nears its end, Soviet engineers aren't resting on their laurels. They're dreaming big, real big. Enter the T-34-100, a beast of a tank designed to take on not just the Germans, but potentially the entire Western world in the brewing tensions of the Cold War. The T-34-100 was meant to be the next evolution of the iconic T-34, packing a massive 100mm gun that could punch through just about anything. This wasn't just a tank, it was a statement. But why did this monster never make it to the battlefield? And what made it so special? Grab a snack, get comfy, and let's unpack the thrilling story of the T-34-100, a tale of ambition, innovation, and a world that wasn't quite ready for it. By 1944, the T-34-85 was already a rock star on the Eastern Front, with its 85mm gun giving German panzers a run for their money. But the Nazis weren't slowing down. Their Tiger and Panther tanks were getting thicker armor, and Soviet commanders knew they needed something bigger to stay ahead. Plus, with the war winding down, the world was shifting. The Allies were still buddies, but cracks were forming. The Soviets could smell the Cold War coming, and they wanted a tank that could stand up to anything the West might throw at them. That's where the T-34-100 comes in. The idea was simple but bold. Take the tried-and-true T-34, slap a massive 100mm gun on it, and make it a nightmare for any enemy tank. Sounds easy, right? Not so fast. Building a tank like this was like trying to put a V8 engine in a classic Mustang without upgrading the frame. It's going to shake things up, and not always in a good way. Two groups of Soviet brainiacs took on the challenge. First, there was the OKB-92 Design Bureau, led by Alexander Savon, a guy who knew a thing or two about big guns. Then there was Factory Number 183, under the leadership of Alexander Morozov, the mastermind behind the original T-34. These teams weren't messing around, but they had different ideas about how to make this beast work. Savin's crew thought, why reinvent the wheel? They tried fitting a 100mm ZS-100 gun into the existing T-34-85 turret. On paper, it was a slam dunk. In reality, not so much. The tank's suspension and transmission groaned under the extra weight and recoil. Even adding a muzzle brake to tame the gun's kick didn't help. The poor T-34-85 just couldn't handle the upgrade without a major overhaul. Meanwhile, Factory Number 183 took a bolder approach. They were already working on a brand new tank, the T-54, which would later become a Cold War icon. Their idea? Borrow the T-54's bigger, sturdier turret and adapt it for the T-34's chassis. This meant redesigning the hull, beefing up the suspension, and rethinking the tank's layout. It was a ton of work, but by spring 1945, they had a prototype ready, the T-34-100, armed with a fearsome D-10T gun. At the same time, Savin's team came up with their own 100mm gun, the LB-1. Both guns were put to the test at the Gorokhovets Proving Grounds, where they duked it out to see which one was king. The LB-1 came out on top thanks to better accuracy and a muzzle brake that kept the recoil in check. For a moment, it looked like the T-34-100 was ready to dominate. But fate had other plans. To really get why the T-34-100 was such a big deal, let's pop the hood and take a look at what made this tank special. This wasn't just a souped-up T-34-85. It was a whole new animal, packed with upgrades that pushed the limits of what a tank could do. The turret, bigger, badder, better. The T-34-100's turret was a game-changer. The turret ring was widened from 1,600mm to 1,700 millimeters to accommodate the massive 100 millimeters gun without throwing off the tank's balance. They also shaved down the turret's height to keep the tank's profile low, because in tank warfare, being a smaller target is a big deal. The frontal armor on the turret was beefed up to 90 millimeters, making it a tough nut to crack compared to the T-34-85 75 millimeters. Inside, the layout got a major makeover. The fuel tanks were moved to the driver's compartment to free up space for ammo. With room for 100 rounds of 100 millimeter shells, this tank was ready for a long fight. But those big shells meant the loader had to be in top shape. Those rounds were heavy. The gun, a 100 millimeters monster. The star of the show was the 100 millimeters gun, either the D-10T or the LB-1. Both were beasts, with ballistics similar to the D-10S used on the Su-100 tank destroyer. These guns could punch through 200 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, which is a big deal even in the post-war years. The LB-1 had a slight edge, thanks to its muzzle brake, which reduced recoil and improved accuracy. The tank also carried a 7.62 millimeters DT machine gun with 1,500 rounds for dealing with infantry. They ditched the hull-mounted machine gun to save weight and space. A controversial move, but made sense given the tank's focus on raw firepower. Suspension, handling the heavy load. Packing a bigger gun meant the T-34-100 was heavier, and that put serious strain on the suspension. Engineers reinforced the second and third road wheels, which took the brunt of the extra weight. But even with these upgrades, the tank couldn't fire on the move. The transmission and suspension just weren't up to the task. This was a bummer, especially as tanks like the American M26 Pershing were starting to master firing while rolling. Still, for defensive positions or calculated strikes, the T-34-100 was a powerhouse. Its armor and gun made it a formidable foe when it was dug in or picking its shots carefully. Engine, old reliable. Under the hood, the T-34-100 kept the trusty V2-34 diesel engine, pumping out 500 horsepower. This gave the tank a top speed of about 28 miles per hour, 45 kilometers per hour, on roads and a range of roughly 186 miles, 300 kilometers. With a power-to-weight ratio of 15.2 horsepower per ton, it wasn't breaking any speed records, but it held its own. The ground pressure of 0.85 kilograms per square centimeter meant it could handle soft terrain like mud or snow, and it could tackle ditches up to 8 feet wide, walls up to 2.4 feet high, and water up to 4.3 feet deep. Crew, lean and mean. The T-34-100 slimmed down its crew from 5 to 4 by ditching the hull machine gunner. This made the tank lighter and easier to maintain, but it put more pressure on the remaining crew. The loader, in particular, had a tough job handling those hefty 100 millimeter shells. The gunner's sight, the TSH, was carried over from the T-34-85, but needed extra precision for the longer-range shots the new gun demanded. So, why did this beast of a tank never see the battlefield? It had everything going for it: a killer gun, upgraded armor, and the T-34's legendary reliability. But a few key factors kept it on the drawing board. The T-54, the new kid on the block. The biggest roadblock was the T-54, a brand new tank that was already in the works. Unlike the T-34-100, which was a souped-up version of an older design, the T-54 was built from the ground up for the future. It had better armor, a more modern layout, a beefier engine, and, crucially, the ability to fire on the move. With the Soviet Union recovering from the war, it made sense to bet on the T-54 instead of splitting resources between two projects. The T-34-100 was like a custom hot rod. Awesome, but built on an aging chassis. The T-54 was a sleek new sports car, ready to dominate the Cold War era. Money talks, post-war economics. World War II left the Soviet Union in tatters. Cities were rubble, factories were bombed out, and millions were homeless. According to historians, the war cost the USSR the equivalent of $2.6 trillion in today's dollars. That's a mind-boggling amount, and it meant the Soviets had to prioritize. Rebuilding homes, roads, and industries came first. Military spending was still huge, but launching a new tank like the T-34-100 meant retooling factories, training workers, and setting up new supply chains, all expensive and time-consuming. The T-34-85 was still in production and doing just fine, so the Soviets stuck with what worked and funneled their energy into the T-54, which became a global icon. Technical limits. Even with all the upgrades, the T-34-100 was still a modified version of a 1940s design. Its suspension, transmission, and engine were pushed to their limits. Any further improvements would have been crazy expensive and still wouldn't have matched the T-54's potential. It was like trying to turn a flip phone into a smartphone. Sometimes you just need a new platform. To really get why the T-34-100 didn't make it, let's zoom out and look at the world in 1945. The Soviet Union was victorious but exhausted. The war had killed over 20 million Soviets, and the economy was on its knees. Rebuilding was the top priority, and every ruble counted. At the same time, the Cold War was heating up. The U.S. was rolling out tanks like the M-26 Pershing, and the British had their Centurion. The Soviets needed a tank that could compete not just in 1945, but for decades to come. The T-54 fit the bill perfectly, while the T-34-100 was a stopgap at best. Economically, the USSR was in a tough spot. The war had destroyed 70,000 villages, 1,700 towns, and countless factories. The Soviets were pouring money into rebuilding, and military projects had to be practical. The T-34-100, as cool as it was, didn't make the cut. Let's have some fun and imagine a world where the T-34-100 hit the assembly lines. How would it have stacked up in the post-war world? Here are a few scenarios to chew on. Scenario 1. Cold War showdowns. In the early Cold War, the T-34-100 would have been a beast. Its 100mm gun could have taken out American M-26 Pershings and early British Centurions with ease. Its low cost and rugged design would have let the Soviets churn out thousands, giving them a numbers advantage. Picture NATO generals sweating as these tanks rolled out in Eastern Europe. But by the late 1940s, newer tanks like the M48 Patton and upgraded Centurions would have outclassed it. The T-34-100's inability to fire on the move would have been a big weakness in fast-paced battles. Scenario 2. The Korean War. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, was the first big test of Cold War tech. Soviet T-34-85S did solid work for North Korea, but they struggled against American M46 Pattons. A T-34-100 with its 100mm gun would have been a game-changer, blasting through U.S. armor and giving the North Koreans a real edge. The catch? Getting T-34-100S to Korea would have been a logistical nightmare. Plus, the T-54 was already rolling out by then, and it was a better long-term bet for the Soviets. Scenario 3. Third World Powerhouse. The Soviets loved exporting tanks to allies and developing nations. The T-34-85 was a hit in places like Egypt, Syria, and Vietnam. A T-34-100 could have been even more fearsome in conflicts like the Arab-Israeli wars, where its 100mm gun would have shredded Israeli M48S and Centurions. But the T-54 and T-55 were cheaper and more versatile, making them the go-to choice for exports. The T-34-100 would have been a niche player at best. Today, the only T-34-100 in existence sits in the Tank Museum in Kubinka, Russia. It's a rare gem, a snapshot of what could have been. To the untrained eye, it looks a lot like a T-34-85, but tank nerds will spot the differences. The wider turret ring, thicker armor, and no whole machine gun. It's like finding a concept car from the 1940s, pure history in metal form. Why visit Kubinka? If you're ever in Russia and love tanks, the Kubinka Tank Museum is a must-see. It's got everything from Nazi Tigers to modern Russian T-90s. The T-34-100 is a highlight, a reminder of the Soviet engineers' big dreams. Drop a comment below if you've been to Kubinka or plan to go. What tanks would you want to check out? The T-34-100 story hits me right in the feels. It's not just about a tank. It's about human ambition and the harsh realities of history. Soviet engineers poured their hearts into this project, but timing and economics got in the way. It's a reminder that even the best ideas can get sidelined if the stars don't align. The T-34-100 also shows the balance between dreaming big and being practical. The Soviets could have sunk billions into this tank, but they chose the T-54, which became a legend. Smart move, but part of me can't help wondering, what if the T-34-100 had gotten its shot? The T-34-100 is more than a forgotten prototype. It's a symbol of what could have been. It's a story of grit, ingenuity, and the tough choices that shape history. Whether you're a tank geek or just love a good underdog tale, the T-34-100 deserve a spot in your memory. If you enjoyed this deep dive, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about the T-34-100. Want more stories about rare tanks or epic military history? Let's keep the conversation going and honor the machines and people who shaped our world.